My mother-in-law, Carol, physically took the dish from my hands and banished me from her kitchen on Christmas Eve, telling me with a saccharine smile that the real cooking was being handled by the adults. She had absolutely no idea that the famous Michelin-recognized chef she had hired to impress her guests was about to wander into that same kitchen, taste the very dish she had just dismissed as amateurish clutter, and then walk into a silent, crowded living room to offer me, the outcast, a job in front of the entire family. She wanted a perfect Christmas, and she was about to get a perfect storm. The journey to her house had been filled with a nervous, hopeful anticipation. It was my first Christmas as a member of the Harrison family, and I wanted so desperately for it to be perfect. Cradled in a basket on my lap, wrapped in a thick layer of festive towels, was my peace offering, a butternut squash gratin. But that clinical name doesn't do it justice. It was my grandmother's recipe, a secret legacy of love and patience passed down to me. It involved hand-rolled pasta infused with sage, a creamy bechamel sauce made with brown butter and nutmeg, and layers of slow-roasted squash. The aroma, a warm, nutty, and herbal scent, filled our car, a tangible piece of my own family's heritage that I was hoping to weave into my new one. As we pulled into the driveway, the house was ablaze with what must have been thousands of perfectly symmetrical, bright white Christmas lights. The perfection was intimidating. Inside, the scene was one of carefully curated holiday cheer. A towering, immaculately decorated tree stood in the living room. Carols played softly from hidden speakers, and a fire crackled in the hearth. It was beautiful, but it felt less like a home and more like a magazine photo shoot. Carol greeted us at the door. She enveloped my husband, David, in a theatrical hug before her eyes fell upon the basket in my arms. Her perfectly painted smile tightened by a millimeter. "Elena, dear," she said, her voice bright and brittle, "you brought something? How thoughtful! The kitchen is an absolute war zone right now, I'm afraid." "It's no trouble," I said, my own smile feeling fragile. "It just needs a little space in the oven to warm through before dinner." "Mom, you have to try this," David chimed in, ever my champion. "Elena spent all day making it. It's her Nona's recipe. It smells incredible." "I'm sure it does," Carol said, though her tone suggested the opposite. She led us inside, and I followed her towards the kitchen. My precious dish held like a shield against the impending social chill. The kitchen was exactly as she'd described, a war zone, but it was a war she was clearly in command of. Two of my aunts-in-law moved around the periphery, chopping vegetables and washing dishes with a nervous energy, careful to stay out of the Carol's way. She surveyed the scene, a culinary Napoleon directing her troops. "Elena, just put that wherever you can find a space," she said, gesturing vaguely to a counter already piled high with mixing bowls and platters. As I tried to clear a small spot, she swooped in. "Oh no, not there," she tutted, moving my basket. "That's where the gravy boat has to go. It has to." She inspected my dish, peering under the foil. "My, that looks rich. We must also think of your father-in-law's digestion, dear." I felt a familiar heat creep up my neck. I explained that it was a family recipe. "How quaint," was her only reply. I finally found a small, unclaimed corner of the oven and slid the heavy casserole dish inside, breathing a small sigh of relief. That relief was short-lived. Carol, who seemed to have sensors for any action taken in her kitchen without her express permission, turned from the stove, a look of profound exasperation on her face. She walked over, pulling on a pair of oven mitts, with a sigh that was pure theater. "You know what, Elena?" she said, her voice now dangerously sweet, loud enough for the aunts to hear. "I appreciate the thought. I really, truly do. But this is a very complicated meal. It's a tradition, and everything is timed down to the very second. Your addition complicates the entire workflow. This is my kitchen, she said, her voice hardening, and I have a system. Before I could protest, she opened the oven, pulled out my beautiful golden brown gratin, and unceremoniously placed it on a distant back counter, next to a bag of potato peelings and some empty cartons. She treated my offering, my grandmother's legacy, my entire day's work, like garbage. She stripped off the oven mitts and patted my arm, her smile a perfect condescending mask. There. Now you've done your part. Why don't you go out and be a good hostess? Go mingle with the guests. Enjoy the party. The adults, she said, giving me a final, dismissive pat, have got the real cooking handled now. I stood there for a moment, speechless, my face burning with a humiliation so intense it felt physical. The two aunts refused to meet my eyes, suddenly finding the contents of the sink utterly fascinating. I had been publicly and completely dismissed. With as much dignity as I could muster, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the warm, nutty scent of my grandmother's love to grow cold on the counter, rejected and forgotten. I walked out of the kitchen on autopilot, my feet carrying me through the crowded living room, past the cheerful, oblivious faces of relatives, and managed a tight smile here, a small knot there, my body performing the social niceties, while my mind was still back in that cold, sterile kitchen, reeling from the casual cruelty of Carol's dismissal. My face was burning with a humiliation so profound it felt like a fever. I found a secluded, seldom-used hallway that led to a small study and slipped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The sudden silence was a blessing. I leaned against the cool wood of the door, closing my eyes and fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill. I would not cry. I would not give her the satisfaction. My first thought was of David. I could picture his face if he had seen what happened. The quick flash of disbelief, followed by the familiar tightening in his jaw, the protective fire in his eyes. He would have confronted his mother right then and there. An argument would have erupted, the carefully curated Christmas Eve dinner would have been ruined, and the tension would have become the main event. It would have placed him, once again, in the impossible position of choosing between the woman he loved and the mother he was bound to. And so my silence became an act of love for him. I would swallow this hurt, this bitter pill of rejection, to preserve his peace, to protect his Christmas. But in the quiet of that study, surrounded by the scent of old books and lemon polish, the memories came rushing back. The ghost of another kitchen, a world away from the stainless steel fortress down the hall, filled my senses. My Nona's kitchen. It wasn't a showpiece. It was small and perpetually warm, the air thick with the scent of simmering garlic, fresh basil, and yeasty bread. The old wooden table was permanently dusted with a fine layer of flour, and her rolling pin, worn smooth by decades of use, felt like a magic wand in her hands. I could see her, clear as day, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still impossibly deft as she taught me the secrets of the gratin. She wasn't just teaching me a recipe, she was passing down a philosophy. Food is not for showing off, tesoro mío, she would tell me, her voice a soft, melodic hum. Perfection is for magazines. The food you make it with your heart. You are not just filling a stomach, you are filling a soul. You remember this, Elena. I remembered the years it took me to master the dish, the dozens of attempts to get the bechamel sauce to the exact consistency, to learn the precise moment when the butter had browned to a perfect, nutty fragrance without burning. I remember the satisfaction of finally rolling out the pasta dough so thin I could see the grain of the wooden table through it, just as she had taught me. This dish wasn't some experimental concoction I'd thrown together. It was a testament to years of practice, of patience, of love. It was a repository of my heritage. Carol hadn't just pushed aside a casserole, she had pushed aside my grandmother, my history, my heart. My passion had eventually spilled out onto the internet. For 3 years, I had run a food blog called The Quiet Kitchen. I never showed my face or used my real name. I just posted recipes, photographs, and stories. Stories about what a dish meant to me, the history behind it. It never became famous in a commercial sense, but it developed a small, fiercely loyal following of serious food lovers, chefs, and other bloggers who appreciated the technique and authenticity. They would leave long, thoughtful comments discussing the nuances of a recipe. A sous chef from a well-regarded restaurant in Chicago once wrote, "Your understanding of flavor balance is extraordinary. You cook like a professional." It was a secret world where my talent was seen and validated. I'd let the blog go dormant when a new job demanded more of my time. But the skills, the passion, the knowledge, they had never left me. And now, the physical embodiment of all that love and skill was sitting on a cold back counter, relegated to the status of kitchen scraps. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden fortune or a secret identity in the conventional sense. It was that cooling dish of gratin. It was a silent, delicious testament to a level of culinary artistry that Carol, with all her expensive appliances and obsession with appearances, could never hope to achieve. A deep sigh escaped my lips, but it was not of defeat. It was of resignation. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but beneath it, a sense of resolve began to form. I would not let her ruin this night. I would play the part of the gracious daughter-in-law. I would smile, I would make small talk, I would celebrate with the man I loved. I pushed myself off the door, smoothed down my dress, and took one last deep breath. I walked back into the fray, my head held high. I would let the dish go cold. I would let the insult pass. I was choosing peace, choosing my husband, choosing to be the bigger person. I had no idea that my quiet surrender was simply setting the stage for a vindication more public and more perfect than any I could have ever planned. I pasted a pleasant, neutral smile onto my face and stepped out of the quiet study, back into the warm, noisy embrace of the party. It felt like stepping onto a stage in the middle of a play for which I had forgotten all my lines. My heart was a dull, heavy stone in my chest, but I forced my body to move with a grace I did not feel. I found David by the fireplace, talking to one of his cousins. He turned as I approached, and his smile faltered instantly. He knew me too well. He could see the faint tremor in my smile, the bruised look in my eyes. "What's wrong?" he murmured, his hand finding mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "What did she say to you?" "It's nothing," I lied softly, squeezing his hand. "Just feeling a little overwhelmed, I think. It's a big day." I couldn't tell him. I couldn't bear to see the anger and hurt that would cloud his face, to watch him torn between defending me and preserving the fragile peace of his family's most cherished holiday. So I sacrificed my own truth for his tranquility, a decision that felt both loving and profoundly lonely. We were soon called into the dining room. The table was a spectacle of festive opulence. A long, embroidered runner cascaded down the center, adorned with fresh pine boughs, glittering ornaments, and the dozen tall, flickering candles. Every plate was perfectly aligned, every wine glass polished to a flawless shine. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. It was Carol's personality made manifest in china and crystal. As everyone took their seats, Carol remained standing at the head of the table, a queen surveying her court. She radiated a smug, self-satisfied energy. She had orchestrated this perfect evening, and she was ready for her accolades. "Welcome, everyone," she began, tapping her glass with a fork for attention. "I am so thrilled to have you all here to celebrate our family's most treasured tradition. Christmas for me has always been about perfection. The perfect tree, the perfect gifts, and of course, the perfect meal. It's about creating a memory that is truly flawless." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes sweeping across the table before landing for a brief, pointed moment on me. "This year," she continued, her voice swelling with importance, "I decided to ensure that our dinner would be more than just perfect. I decided to make it truly unforgettable. To that end, I have enlisted a little professional help to oversee our main course and ensure that every detail is up to the highest possible standard." A murmur of intrigued whispers rippled around the table. David shot me a confused look, and I just shrugged, as mystified as he was. "Please join me in offering a warm welcome," Carol announced grandly, "to the celebrated owner and head chef of Fleur de Lis, the brilliant chef Julien Dubois." As if on cue, the swinging door to the kitchen opened, and the chef himself stepped partially into the room. He was tall and lean, with intense, intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense professionalism. He wore a crisp white chef's coat and held a tasting spoon like a scepter. He did not smile, but simply gave a short, sharp nod to the room, a gesture that conveyed both respect for the guests and an impatience to get back to his work. The doors swung shut, leaving behind a room full of deeply impressed relatives. The validation in the room was palpable, and it all flowed directly to Carol. She glowed, accepting the oohs and ahs as if she had personally won a Michelin star. She had successfully elevated her status, proving herself to be a woman of such discerning taste that even a famous chef would answer her call. The first courses began to arrive, served by 2 waiters hired for the evening. The food was objectively perfect. A delicate consommé, a technically flawless winter salad. It was delicious, but it was also impersonal. It was food designed to impress, not to comfort. It was a meal without a soul. As I ate, I felt a final fleeting pang of sadness for my own humble dish, now certainly cold and abandoned on that back counter. I thought of my Nana, and I sent a silent apology into the universe. I had let her recipe, our tradition, be defeated by snobbery. I took a sip of wine and resigned myself to the rest of the evening, completely unaware that in the kitchen just beyond the door, a culinary investigation was about to begin. The main event was coming, but it wasn't the one Carol had planned. A forgotten, unloved dish was about to have its moment, and my quiet, painful surrender had inadvertently set the stage for a vindication I never saw coming. The first courses were cleared away with quiet efficiency, the empty plates a testament to the chef's technical skill. The dining room was filled with a low, contented murmur, the conversation lubricated by the expensive wine Carol had selected. My mother-in-law was glowing. She was the conductor of this perfect symphony, and the grand crescendo, the magnificent prime rib, was yet to come. I had settled into my role as a gracious, smiling observer. The dull ache of my earlier humiliation had subsided into a quiet resignation. I had made my peace with the forgotten dish, with the evening, with my place in this family. I was so lost in my own thoughts that I almost didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way the confident rhythm of the kitchen suddenly seemed to falter. The swinging door between the dining room and the kitchen, which had been a whirlwind of silent, purposeful motion, was suddenly still. A moment later, it was pushed open, not with a gentle nudge of a waiter's hip, but with an abrupt, sharp thrust. It was Chef Julien Dubois. He stood framed in the doorway, and the entire room fell silent. He was not carrying the majestic roasted prime rib on a silver platter as everyone expected. Instead, he held my humble cream-colored casserole dish in his hands, cradling it with a reverence that seemed almost absurd. His face, which had been a mask of cool professionalism, was now alight with an intense, fiery passion. His eyes scanned the room, not looking at the guests as a whole, but searching, seeking someone out. I can only imagine the scene that had just transpired in the kitchen. The chef, a true artist, would never be able to ignore a scent that was out of place. In a brief lull while the prime rib rested, the warm, nutty aroma of my gratin, so different from the clean, savory scents of his own professional kitchen, must have cut through the air. His curiosity, the instinct of any great chef, would have been piqued. I can see him in my mind's eye, finding the dish on the back counter, dismissing it as perhaps a staff meal, then dipping a spoon in out of sheer habit. I can almost feel the moment the food touched his tongue, the initial shock, the complex layers of flavor unfolding, the deep, caramelized sweetness of the slow-roasted squash, the earthy, almost pine-like fragrance of the fresh sage, the profound, nutty depth of perfectly browned butter, and beneath it all, the tender, flawless texture of the handmade pasta, a testament not just to skill, but to patience. A second spoonful, this one slower, more analytical. He would have deconstructed it in his mind, recognizing the technique. He would have noted the perfect silky consistency of the bechamel, a sign that it hadn't been rushed. He would have appreciated the balance, the way no single flavor overpowered the others. He would have known, with the absolute certainty of a master recognizing the work of another, that this was not the creation of an amateur. His voice, when it finally boomed through the silent dining room, made several people jump. "Carol!" My mother-in-law looked up, a bright, expectant smile on her face, believing her moment of ultimate triumph had arrived. "Yes, chef?" "This dish," he said, taking a step into the room and holding up my gratin for all to see. "You told me in the kitchen that your daughter-in-law brought this. Which one is she?" Every head at the table turned, a sea of confused and curious faces. I felt the blood drain from my own. It was as if a spotlight had just been switched on, illuminating me in my chair. Carol's face, which had been beaming with pride, was now a canvas of utter confusion. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Slowly, reluctantly, she pointed a single trembling finger in my direction. Chef Dubois' intense eyes found mine. He ignored the stunned silence of the room, the gaping faces of my new family. He walked around the long dining table with the focused, purposeful strides of a man on a mission. He stopped directly behind my chair, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. The entire room held its breath. "You are Elena?" he asked, his voice softer now, but still carrying an intense urgency. "Yes," I managed to whisper. "You made this?" he asked, gesturing with the dish. "Yes," I said again. It's my grandmother's recipe." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring the very thought of it. "Your grandmother," he said, his voice now filled with a profound respect, "was an artist." He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "And so are you." "I have been a professional chef for 20 years. I trained under Elena in Paris. I have earned 2 Michelin stars for my restaurant. I tell you this not to boast, but to give you context for what I am about to say." He took a deep breath. "This dish," he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction, "is one of the most technically perfect and emotionally resonant things I have tasted in the last decade. The emotion process of the sauce, the consistency of the hand-rolled pasta, the Maillard reaction achieved on the squash without sacrificing its integrity. This is not home cooking. This is the work of a professional, and a brilliant one at that." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping but still audible to the entire silent table. "My restaurant, fleur de lis, is always searching for true talent, people with passion and soul, people like you. I am formally and very seriously offering you the position of sous chef, effective whenever you can start. You would be an honor to my kitchen." The chef's words hung in the silent dining room, seeming to sparkle in the candlelight. A job offer. A position as a sous chef at Fleur de Lis. The room was a tableau of stunned faces, each one frozen in a state of disbelief. My mind, which had been a turmoil of hurt and quiet resignation, was now a perfect, blissful blank. I couldn't process what was happening. I just stared up at the renowned chef, who was looking at me with an expression of pure, professional admiration. It was David who broke the spell. My husband, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of growing wonder, pushed his chair back, stood up, and began to applaud. It wasn't loud, polite applause. It was a thunderous, heartfelt ovation for an audience of one. "That's my wife," he boomed, a grin of pure, unadulterated pride splitting his face. His applause startled the rest of the table into action. A smattering of confused but enthusiastic claps broke out. The aunts and cousins were looking at me as if I had sprouted wings. But my eyes were fixed on one person, Carol. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the table like a queen deposed. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin looking as waxy and brittle as an old candle. Her perfect hostess with the mostest smile was frozen in a grotesque rictus of horror. She stared at Chef Dubois, her ultimate status symbol, the man she had hired to validate her own superior taste, who had instead just publicly and spectacularly honored the very person she had tried so hard to diminish. Her perfectly orchestrated evening, her flawless memory, had just been hijacked. Chef Dubois, seemingly oblivious to the family drama he had just ignited, smiled at me. "Forgive my forwardness, but talent like this is a rare thing. We can discuss details later." With the final, respectful nod, he turned and strode back into his domain, the kitchen. What followed was the most surreal meal of my life. The waiters emerged with the main course, a magnificent, perfectly cooked prime rib. But no one cared about the prime rib. All eyes were on the humble casserole dish that the chef, on his way back to the kitchen, had personally retrieved from the back counter and placed in the center of the table with the reverence of a crown jewel. "Well," boomed Uncle Robert, breaking the awkward silence, "I'm not letting that go to waste. Pass it down here." A serving spoon was produced, and the dish began its journey around the table. And as each person took a bite, a chorus of genuine, unrestrained delight filled the room. "Oh my goodness, Elena, this is divine. What is in this?" "It's the best thing I've ever tasted," a cousin added. Compliments, genuine and effusive, flew at me from all directions. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, but this time it was not from humiliation, but from a shy, growing warmth. I watched Carol throughout the meal. She didn't take any of my gratin. She sat in silence, mechanically cutting her prime rib into tiny, uneaten pieces. Every compliment directed at me was a fresh wound to her pride. Every happy exclamation over my food was a testament to her own spectacular misjudgment. She was utterly and completely isolated at the head of her own perfectly set table. Later, as the evening was winding down and the chef was preparing to leave, he sought me out one last time. He found me in the living room, showing David's youngest cousin pictures on my phone. "Elena," he said quietly. I stood up to face him. I meant every word of my offer. It is a standing invitation. This was my moment of ultimate grace. I looked at this man, this culinary giant who had unknowingly become my champion, and I smiled a genuine smile. "Chef Dubois," I began, my voice filled with a sincerity he could not mistake. "Your words tonight, they are the greatest compliment I could ever hope to receive, and your offer is an honor beyond words." I paused, gathering my thoughts. But this dish, it's not about a career for me. It's my grandmother's love story, told with butter and flour. She taught me that the best food isn't meant to impress. It's meant to be shared with the people you love. Tonight, that's all I wanted to do. Share a little piece of my family with my new one. That is my only ambition. A look of deep understanding passed over his features. He nodded slowly. Your grandmother was a very wise woman, he said, and they are very lucky to have you. He shook my hand warmly, and with a final smile, he was gone. As David and I prepared to leave an hour later, the goodbyes were different. The cousins and aunts hugged me tightly, begging me to bring the dish again next year. When we got to Carol, she was standing by the door, her earlier radiance completely extinguished. She looked tired and small. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. Your dish was very nice, dear, she mumbled, the words sounding like they were being dragged from her. It wasn't an apology, but it was a concession. It was the white flag of surrender, and it was more than enough. Thank you, Carol, I said softly. Merry Christmas. In the car on the way home, David couldn't stop talking about it, his pride a tangible thing in the dark, quiet space. I just listened, my heart full. The vindication I felt wasn't about the job offer or Carol's humiliation. It was about that moment when the family tasted my food. In that moment, they weren't just tasting a gratin. They were tasting my Nona's story. They were tasting my love. Carol's kitchen was a sterile theater of control and status. My cooking was, and always would be, an act of love. And tonight, love had won. A story that proves true talent can't be ignored. What do you think Carol will be like at next year's Christmas dinner? Let us know your predictions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this delicious story of karmic vindication, please give this video a like and be sure to subscribe for more satisfying stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.